According to the book The History of Little People and Their Spiritually Advanced Civilizations Around the World by anthropologist Susan B. Martinez, the planet was once inhabited by an ancient race of short stature, present in various cultures around the globe. And when we start looking at the legends and myths scattered across different continents, it really catches our attention. In Mexico and Peru, for example, there are reports of dwarf gods linked to fertility and agriculture. They appeared out of nowhere to teach, guide, and then disappeared as if they had never been there. Remember the masters of Dungeons and Dragons who appear and disappear out of nowhere? It's kind of like that. In Hawaii, the ancients told stories of the MAKHUNIK, small nocturnal builders who erected temples in silence and disappeared before dawn. These figures appear everywhere, always discreet, connected to nature, silence, wisdom, or invisible work. And perhaps it is no coincidence that they ended up inspiring so many well-known stories. The hobbits, for example, with their bare feet, round houses, and simple way of life, were born directly from this imagination. Just like the tiny 15-centimeter inhabitants of Lilliput in Gulliver's Fantastic Travels, or the 7 dwarfs in Snow White, who lived in the forest, worked in mines, and lived on the margins of big human society. All these stories have something in common. They show that, for some reason, humanity has always been enchanted by small beings, as if there were a whole world hidden under our noses. A world made by tiny hands with its own rules and invisible logic. But what if I told you that this world exists, and that in the middle of the Iranian desert, there is a village known as the land of the Lilliputians, where no one is taller than 4.4 feet, and that, despite being thousands of years old, it has been forgotten by the rest of the world for centuries. That's where Bello Mundo is taking you today, to an enigmatic, isolated place that holds some of the most surprising stories you will ever hear. Number 1. Location. Our journey today begins in eastern Iran near the border with Afghanistan, in a region called South Khorasan. There, in the middle of a rocky desert, far from tourist routes, there is a village that seems to have stopped in time. Its name is MAKHUNIK. Getting there is not easy. The most common route starts from the city of Birjand, the provincial capital. From there, it is more than 4 hours by road on narrow, dusty, and poorly signposted roads. It is the kind of trip that requires patience, preparation, and a good supply of water. Along the way, the landscape hardly changes. There are miles and miles of dry soil, sun-baked rocks, and barren hills where the wind blows without finding any shade. The climate is extreme. In summer, the heat easily exceeds 40 degrees Celsius. In winter, temperatures can plummet below zero, with early mornings reaching -5 degrees. But if there is one thing that does not change, whether it is cold or hot, it is the scarcity of rain. It hardly ever shows up, no matter the season. But when MAKHUNIK finally appears on the horizon, the monotony disappears. What appears is a village that seems to have been built on a different scale. It is as if someone had shrunk an entire village and left it there, forgotten in the desert. The first thing that catches your eye are the tiny buildings, houses so low that they look like they were made for dolls or children. Narrow doors, mud walls, simple roofs, and shapes that deviate from the norm. And it is precisely these that we will talk about in a moment. But first, it is worth understanding how it all began. Number 2. History. To understand how this village came about, we need to go back to a time long before paved roads, tourism, and well-drawn maps. The village's history dates back about 400 years, but what is known is that the first human groups arrived in that region many centuries earlier. probably fleeing conflicts and invasions in other parts of Iran and Afghanistan. They were not warriors or nomads, just families seeking shelter and peace. The landscape was the same rocky desert as today, but even more inhospitable. And it was precisely this hostility that helped keep the people isolated. The difficult terrain, the lack of nearby rivers, and the distance from any urban center made MAKHUNIK a natural hideaway. The village grew slowly, with no easy access to water, no fertile land in abundance, and very few trade routes. The residents learned to live with the bare minimum. Trade with other villages was rare. The language, customs, and even the physical traits of the population began to mold to the local conditions. Isolation shaped everything. They grew only what the soil would allow: barley, wheat, and a few root vegetables. They raised goats and chickens, and they built houses adapted to the climate, small, semi-underground, designed to protect them from the summer heat and the bitter cold of winter. For centuries, the name MAKHUNIK did not even appear on maps. It was only in the 20th century that Iranian scholars began to visit the region and noticed something curious. This village was unlike any other village in the country. And then came the surprise. In addition to the tiny houses, the residents themselves were also shorter than average. Visibly reduced stature, fragile appearance, discreet manners. All of this helped spread a nickname that began to circulate among visitors and curious onlookers: the village of little people. But what could explain this striking trait? Was it genetic, a rare condition, or was there something more behind this physical characteristic? That's what we're going to find out now. Number 3. Why were the residents so small? For a long time, those who arrived in MAKHUNIK were not only surprised by the tiny houses. The residents themselves seemed to have come out of an old fairy tale, short, frail, silent, and with habits very different from the rest of the country. Many did not eat meat, rejected alcoholic beverages, and even today, in some families, it is still believed that television brings a curse. It was a restrained, measured life, where everything seemed to function on a different scale. But the most visible mark was their height. While the global average is between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 11 inches, in MAKHUNIK, most adults were no taller than 4 feet 5 inches. A difference too big not to attract attention. However, contrary to what many people imagine, there is nothing magical about it. The explanation is much sadder, and it starts with food. For decades, residents lived under a regime of chronic malnutrition. The dry soil, harsh climate, and isolation made it difficult to access any kind of varied food. The diet was low in protein and vitamins. There was no fresh fruit, almost no meat, and little milk. The only crops grown were simple grains, barley, turnips, and a small fruit called jujube, similar to a date. The staple diet was modest and repetitive. One of the most common dishes was goat's milk, whey mixed with wild pistachios. Another used dried turnips with powdered milk. Everything was used to the fullest, with no waste. And curiously, even tea, Iran's national symbol, was frowned upon. Drinking too much tea was for addicts, said the elders. So even that was not part of everyday life in the village. This diet affected the physical development of children for generations. They were born small and remained small. Short stature became the norm, reinforced by marriages between close relatives, which were common in such isolated villages. But time changed things. From the mid-20th century onwards, new roads cut through the desert. Vehicles arrived along with industrialized products and access to healthcare. Rice became part of the diet, as did chicken. Children began to grow taller than their parents. The physical difference between generations became a symbol of a new era. Today, most residents of MAKHUNIK are considered to be of normal height. Many are well taller than their grandparents. The Lilliputian houses are a thing of the past. Much of the population now lives in brick houses with large rooms, normal ceilings, and a more comfortable life. But these new houses stand side by side with the old ones. And it is precisely in these original buildings of MAKHUNIK that we now immerse ourselves. Number 4. Buildings. Walking through MAKHUNIK is like entering a handmade model. Everything there seems small, as if someone had shrunk an entire village and left it in the middle of the desert. The houses are so small that they look like they were made for children. Some doors barely reach an adult's knee. Others are just over a meter high, forcing visitors to bend down considerably to enter. The buildings are stuck together, forming a tangle of low walls, narrow passages, and alleys where almost no sunlight enters. There are no squares, temples, or larger buildings. The village was designed on a scale of survival, and nothing more. Most of the houses follow a single family pattern, a single multifunctional room where people sleep, cook, and store what little they have. Many of them have been partially dug into the ground, which helps keep the heat out in summer and the cold out in winter. There are no large windows or reinforced doors. The openings are minimal, often covered with cloth or thin boards. In some houses, you can barely stand up, and yet they are still there, resisting the passage of time. Everything was built with what was available nearby: stone, clay, straw, and the collective effort of the residents. But the tiny scale, cramped layout, and fragile appearance of the houses make the village seem like something from another world. However, the low height was not just an adaptation to the stature of the residents. It was also a practical necessity. Smaller houses required less building material, and since there were no pack animals, everything had to be carried by hand over miles of dry land. In addition, small structures heated up faster in the cold and blended in better with the landscape, making the village less visible to potential invaders. And even now, with much of the population living in new, larger houses, the old buildings remain, intact, preserved, and steeped in history. But it wasn't just the small houses that endured. Customs were also preserved. Number 5. Customs in daily life today. Despite growing contact with the outside world, MAKHUNIK still retains its own way of life. There is no supermarket or high school. What exists is the bare minimum. Some houses have electricity and running water, but cell phone reception is spotty, and the internet, when it works, is slow. Even so, the village continues at its own pace, as if time passes differently there. The residents wake up early. Many still grow small vegetable gardens, raise chickens, and take care of goats. The women are the guardians of traditional weaving. They make rugs, clothes, and blankets using wool yarn dyed with natural dyes. The older men spend their time repairing mud walls, taking care of old houses, or sitting on rocks in the shade of a wall and chatting. Few children are born in the village today. Most families have children living in larger cities, such as Beryand or Mashhad. But on weekends and religious holidays, many of these children return to visit their parents, bringing news, supplies, and stories from the outside world. At these times, the village comes to life. The dirt streets fill with laughter, the clay ovens are lit, and the smell of fresh bread spreads. And even with the passing of the years, some customs remain. There are those who still do not drink alcohol, do not eat meat often, and avoid television or radio, believing that these habits stray from the traditional way of life. Tea, which was once despised, is now common. but there are still those who turn up their noses at it. And while clothes have changed, the way of life remains simple. No rush, no excess, with a quiet attachment to what has always been theirs. And it is precisely this mixture of past and present that has caught the world's attention. MAKHUNIK, which did not even appear on maps before, has now become a destination for those seeking something different. Number 6. Tourism and attractions in MAKHUNIK. Despite its modest size, this place attracts a growing number of curious visitors. Not everyone is willing to make the journey there, but those who do arrive find a unique setting that combines silence, history, and a certain air of mystery. The village's biggest attraction is undoubtedly its preserved tiny houses. Many of them remain exactly as they were in the past, with very low doors, rudimentary roofs, walls made of dried mud, and no sign of modern comfort. Some of these buildings are uninhabited and function almost as open-air museums, allowing visitors to enter, observe, and feel what it was like to live in such a small space. The residents are usually welcoming but discreet. Some guide visitors through the village's narrow streets, explain the old customs, show the houses partially dug into the ground, and even offer tea or local products. In addition to the buildings, the surrounding landscape is also impressive. The deserted hills, the open sky, and the feeling of being completely off the tourist trail create an atmosphere of isolation that few regions can replicate. MAKHUNIK has also been the subject of documentaries, reports, and anthropological studies. The fact that it is informally called the City of the Little Ones still attracts attention. Although the residents themselves no longer use this nickname, they prefer to be remembered not for their size, but for their resilience, preserved history, and the uniqueness of the place. Today, there are local initiatives trying to promote tourism in a sustainable way, without changing the character of the village. The idea is to keep alive the memory of the tiny buildings, the old customs, and the people who made this piece of dry land one of the most curious places in Iran. And for those interested in unusual trips, MAKHUNIK is one of those stops that leave a lasting impression. There is no luxury, no mass attractions, but there is history, silence, and a bunch of houses that look like they came out of a fantasy book. And now I ask you, had you ever heard of MAKHUNIK? Are you interested in visiting this unique village where even the houses look like they were made for dolls? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoyed this content, take the opportunity to like it, subscribe to the Bello Mundo channel, and activate the bell. That way, you won't miss any of the upcoming trips we'll be taking together, because there are many small hidden places with a huge history waiting for us. Thank you very much for joining us here. See you at the next destination.